Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you again for joining us here at Edmentum's virtual conference. I hope you've been enjoying your session so far. This is our afternoon educator panel, Instructional Considerations for the 2021 school year. My name is Haley Peterson, and I'm a marketing specialist here at Edmentum. As always, I'll be in the background of today's presentation, making sure your questions are answered. We have a very exciting panel of amazing educators, so let's quickly go over that housekeeping and then we'll get right into our session. As you know, technical issues can happen. If you are experiencing issues with audio or visuals, let us know in the chat. And if for some reason we get kicked off the webinar today, we'll get back up and running as soon as possible. And you can rejoin the webinar with the link you used to join today. If you're having audio issues, please check your device volume, the audio settings in the lower left-hand corner, or please call in by telephone. The number can be found in your webinar confirmation email. Perfect, so let's take a look at that that Zoom webinar control panel. Hopefully it's a familiar attendee interface for you now. All right, so that chat feature will expand the chat to the right-hand side of your screen. In this chat panel, you can add comments on today's presentation to our panelists. You may have noticed that you can only see your own chat messages. This is due to the anticipated high volume of messages in your chat throughout presentations. And we want to make sure you have the best possible experience. So do me a favor real quick and just let us know what sessions you've been enjoying so far in that chat feature. Okay, so next, that Q&A feature opens the questions pane. That's where you can ask any questions for today's panel. Please use that Q&A feature. We have a lot of great questions for our panelists today, but we're hoping to save some time for audience Q&A at the end of today's session. And then the last two features I want to point out are the audio settings and how to exit today's session. If you're having any issues hearing us, we suggest you check out that audio settings first. And then lastly, when today's session is over, you can exit the webinar using the leave button. All right, perfect. So that's it for my housekeeping, quick and painless. And now I'd love to pass it over to Winnie O'Leary, manager of our Educator Network, to introduce today's panel. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much, Haley. You're right. I am the manager of the Educator Network. And we are really glad to have you join this panel today for a discussion on instructional considerations for the 2021 school year. I've asked 3 educators from our Educator Network to join us and to give us a picture of the lens in which they're looking through coming back to school next year is, and how they are preparing for this next phase of instruction. So let's jump right in. We have Leslie, who has taught in elementary school. I'm waving back at you, Leslie, for about 16 years, both in California, Mexico City, and most recently in Minneapolis, or outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And she's taught in dual languages for 12 of those 16 years, am I correct?
Yep.
Yep, okay. And we have Kevin. Kevin is from just outside of Tacoma, Washington, in Spanway. And he is a teacher of blended learning environment at Bethel Accelerated. Is that correct, Kevin?
It's close enough, yeah.
Okay. Perfect. And he teaches social studies and English, and is a social studies and English content coach. So, and then we have Victoria, and Victoria is a 4th and 5th grade teacher, but soon to be a 3rd grade teacher, right? And she works with science, language arts, and writing at the Jackson Independent School in Jackson, Kentucky. And she brings a unique lens in that she really focuses her instruction around building empathy and creating real-world scenarios to build that entrepreneurial mindset. So that's a big word for me, but we're really super glad to have you guys here. So let's jump on in. This year has been really ablaze with confusion and exploration of new and strange things. Leslie, a spotlight has been put on education in ways that we had never even imagined. And we have a lot of topics to get to today, but I'm going to put you on the spot first.
Sure.
There's been a conversation around inequities in education, and can you speak to some of these and some things we need to consider?
Sure. So that first question, how do we know that students are feeling included and a sense of equity in our school environments? And when we think about that, when we think about all the environments in which kids have, how they're feeling is going to be impacted by all the different environments in which they're in. And when we delve even deeper into that, we notice that the environments in which children come from are all dictated by adult actions. They're all created by adults. What does their Little League look like? What does art in their community look like? And so on and so forth. And so when we translate that to our school environments and we think, how are kids feeling about equity? Well, that all depends on really us, the adults. How are the adults creating an environment where students are feeling included? So if we pop down and think about how do kids know and feel that sense of belonging, we have to really be honest with ourselves and ask, do we have the courage to reflect on, as administrators, as our building as a whole, and then as classroom teachers, at our own environment? What books do we buy? What do we choose to hang on the walls? What do we translate to send home? All of these different components are what children, knowing or not, feel in our classroom environments. So we have to ask ourselves, and I wish there was a checklist. Wouldn't it be lovely if we just had a checklist? Oh, if you do this and this and this and this. But one thing I love about this is, how are our students feeling? Often we don't get the chance to think of students in this country as all of our students. And 2020 has definitely, as Winnie talked about, thrown us a curveball, and many things have been highlighted. And so I want us to take that second and think about our students. And we know, especially the effects that we've seen from COVID, and then also the demonstrations that are happening across our country, that something that happens in one corner of our country is embedded and webbed into the experiences of the rest of us. And as the adults, we have to take that back into our environments and ask ourselves, what are we teaching? And do we have the courage to reflect and ask ourselves, do all of our students really feel included? And if not, are we going to take that on? And if we don't know how, or if it's just too uncomfortable, do we have the courage to ask for help? Uncomfortable situations and uncomfortable conversations are definitely going to continue to happen as our presidential elections come about in November. So how do we address that? Does our community allow us to do that? And if not, why? Are we doing it just because we feel uncomfortable, or are we doing it for our students, those kiddos that need to feel comfortable? So how do we know they're feeling included? Well, we have to go kind of into our gut and ask ourselves, do I have representations of all of my students in my classroom, whether that's through the platforms I choose to include, the books I choose to read, the things I choose to highlight from my curriculum? And what do we need to put in place to move forward? Well, we need to ask ourselves, what more do I need to learn? And really, really show our kiddos that we're lifelong learners as well. So as I think we look at all of those different pieces, we can really reflect and see, do our students feel included and have that sense of equity in our own environments that the adults are ultimately creating? I know that you'll be receiving some information about some starting points on how to delve into some of these topics, and I really hope that all of us do.
Yeah, I like that, pointing out that we are lifelong learners as well, that this is one of the reasons why we went into the classroom. I think that's a really powerful statement. So thank you very much, Leslie. All right, Victoria, let's take some of these wonderful things that Leslie has pointed out, and let's talk about project-based learning. Haley, can we switch the slides? There we go, perfect. Let's, I know that this is something that's very near and dear to your heart. What are some things that we need to consider when we're talking to and working with struggling students or struggling to engage students? How do we take their natural curiosity and exploit it?
Sure. Like I've talked about with you guys at the in the Educator network and things like that, virtual classrooms especially are suited for utilizing student curiosity, and that is basically through the use of project-based learning units. And so the important thing that we need to remember about PBL and project-based learning is that it allows for multiple entry and exit points. So You come up with units that could take a week to go through all the materials. So the students have like their own, they still have a schedule, but they get to approach the material in their way. They can do all of the reading in one day if they want. They can spread it over the week, and then they can take that learning, and then they have multiple exit points. So for example, in my classroom, I always allow for at least 4 different exit points. So I'll usually let my students, some of them really like to write a short little essay about what they've learned. That way they can get everything they know out on paper. Some of them like to build a model. And so they build a model and they make a short video of themselves explaining what that model means. Some of them like to create videos on YouTube, or some of them like to use TikTok and then send the TikTok to YouTube. But and then others like to just do like a short question response thing like that. So I always have 4 different modes that they can show what they know. And so project-based learning really gives you that flexibility, that way that you can have all of those different ways that students can express what they know. And I think that's really important for at-risk populations and students who struggle. And the big thing that I've noticed in my classroom, building my whole curriculum around project-based learning, is that students who typically would be considered at risk or struggling actually do much better than most of the time students who usually do really well on tests, because they have a different avenue to express how they know it, instead of just trying to get what's in their mind down on paper. So given that option and that choice is a big help. And then, for example of this, during the shutdown in March, one of my lessons was about extreme weather. And so all week long, they had to read about extreme cases of weather, tornadoes, floods, things like that. And then they had to create a building for our new school building that will be able to withstand all of these natural elements. So I had some students who wrote essays about the type of building that we should build. Some built 3D models that were amazing. And then others drew pictures. They just had all different kinds of opportunities to use that curiosity. They did their own research. So that really helped them connect to the material as well, because they had ownership in it. It was something that they were trying to convince other people why they thought it was the best way to go. So that really connected them to the material as well, which is a big help. And that really helps to up your engagement. And then also, this is relevant to the students because, like Winnie said, I'm very connected with the entrepreneurial spirit and trying to build that in students. So if they know that there is something in there for them, this is not just learning it to be learning it, this is building skills that they can use in the real world, then automatically you have engagement there. And that's what I've seen in my classroom. They know that they're not doing it just so they can get a good grade on a test. They're doing it so that they can go out in the world and start their own business someday. And that's really changed the way that my classroom operates. You know, I have 4th graders who are on Facebook, like trying to sell their own materials right now for back to school. They're making masks. So it's just a different kind of feeling that they have, and they've learned that in the classroom. And I think that's pretty cool.
I agree. It's a confidence that you're giving them too. Yeah. Brilliant.
And then the important thing about entrepreneurship too is that it covers all subject areas. Project-based learning, you can build your entire curriculum around one project for that unit. For example, for the building one of the extreme weather, they had to not only be able to explain why they did it, they also had to come up with a budget, which we were going over money that week for math. My partner teacher was doing money. So that also built in those other subject areas, which is always important.
Yeah, and it builds up that community with with the students, with you and the students, with you and the math teacher. So that's really great. Thank you very much, Victoria. Okay, Kevin, it's your turn. We've heard from Leslie and Victoria about the importance of connecting to the students and to the families and the caregivers. Can you talk a little bit about this community, this idea of PLCs? I know you live in a virtual world primarily. Can you speak to building that community and where some opportunities might exist?
Yes. So I want to start with just a brief overview of what blended learning is for anyone who's just not fully aware. So blended learning is a combination of, we have our students in a brick and mortar building. They're required to come a certain amount of hours a month, although we're open 12 hours a day. So they can come 12 hours every day if they want. They can come 10 minutes. But the cool thing is that Myself and other teachers are there, and we work primarily one-on-one with students. So if they don't understand a test or a concept, or if it's a life issue, they can come up to us and we build a relationship, which is what our school was founded on, the idea that a caring relationship is what helps students succeed. So, and then the rest of it, the courses are online, which is the blended part, so they can work from home. So in March, when the shutdown happened, it really hit us hard, because what made us special was the fact that we could interact with our students, but all of a sudden we can't. So the last 4 months have been interesting. All those great relationships we formed and all the work we've been doing, we've seen a slow, steady decline month by month by month, because we're not getting to the root of what made us special, the relationships. And we're going to see this on a national scale here in a few months, because it's looking like most states, if not the entire country, are pretty much going to go entirely virtual, or at least a heavy combination of virtual. So the next thing is, how do we connect? So we've been working on a lot of different things, and I think we finally kind of figured it out. So we took we're a fairly small school, we have about 250 students. We divided them up into 4 groups, and we've assigned staff members to different groups. So every week they receive texts, phone calls, and emails from us. We make sure that we get at least 1 or 2 actual communication with them, because the key to this is consistency. It's not so much about, and this is kind of building to the next question too, how do we build community? You want to be a force that you're there, right? You don't want them to be contacting you, hey, I don't understand this assignment, and get a response 4 days later. You want to be checking in with them as much as you can, and that's hard. This is different, which I'm going to be jumping around a lot, because this is how I teach anyway. Change is scary. Education is changing moving forward. It's going to be far more like online involved. And a lot of people, the first thing they say is, this isn't going to work. Students aren't going to be engaged with this, blah, 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 blah. But if you think about it, how many times in history has something seemed insane or impossible? Like, imagine the first person who said, we should send a rocket to the moon. Like, that sounds insane. Or imagine being the person describing what the internet is. It can't be done. It's impossible. Yet, those things are standard now, right? And now here we are. The education landscape is changing and evolving, and it's exciting because we're right in the middle of it. But the key is, we have to maintain what we're so good at, and that's caring about our students. So I'm going to try to avoid the theoretical parts and talk about what we're actually doing. So other than constant communication, we also have open office hours. We Zoom constantly every day. Something special we did is we had a couple kids graduate in July. So what we did, since they couldn't have a ceremony, is the entire staff got together in their cars and did a grad caravan. We tracked them to their houses and did the whole thing where we go by, jumped out and socially distanced, took photos, and made them feel really special. And that's what makes our community work, is showing that we are, in fact, real humans that are going to be there for you, and not just someone who grades your papers. Rita Pearson.
I was jumping in to say, I think that's sort of a standard. This idea of communication is really critical. If you were in one of the earlier sessions today, Kathleen Hester was talking about, she's a principal at a charter school in Newark, New Jersey, but she made 9,000 phone calls within 6 weeks, checking in on families. So I think that's just another really good piece of this. Like, ultimately what comes out of this is maybe that we are in closer contact with our kids and our caregivers and families.
Yeah, studies show that, so they did a nationwide study on dropout students. They interviewed thousands of them, and they found that the one thing that kind of united them in why they dropped out was because they didn't have even one caring adult in their lives. And that's reality, right? If you have someone backing you in your corner, you're far more likely to succeed. And that's what this is giving us the opportunity to do. Because think about this, the brick and mortar system hasn't changed in 150 years or so. We put 30 kids in a room, completely different learning styles, and we have to try to reach each one of them in a 50-minute period. It's impossible. It's not the best system for either person, the student or the teacher. But with online learning, it's going to be far more one-on-one involved, or small groups, and you can reach those kids a lot more effectively. So that's what I have to say about this area, is giving us a better chance to be one-on-one, more communicative, more showing that we can do individual attention, which I think is actually a benefit of all this.
That's wonderful for the silver lining. Leslie, you have a really different lens than Kevin does, because you are working with the littles, and like very many educators, you went from that brick and mortar environment to a virtual environment overnight. How do we exploit what we've done for the past few months? How do we take what we've learned from moving into that virtual world so suddenly and apply it to the brick and mortar? What do you wish everyone knew about this? And you're on mute, so I'm sure everything you're saying is really great. There you go.
There we go. Yeah. Let's see. So I had a kiddo come in on Thursday in March and just absolutely in tears. We now have cases of COVID in our state, and very anxious child. I hug him, honey, it's okay. You know, the adults are here to take care of you. No worries. Go through our day. I say, give my hugs and high fives at the door at the end of the day. And then I receive a call that we're closed. We're done. 4:30 emergency staff meeting. Then we all get phone calls. And I was just thinking of my students going, I just told them it's all okay. Oh my goodness. So did we have to go back and repair a lot? We sure did. And that was just an absolute, oh my goodness, what do we do now?
Mm-hmm.
And then our governor gave us some time to prep, and we were completely panicked, as I think a lot of people were. And luckily my team, we rose to the occasion, and we thought, you know what, let's do this and let's try to do it well. And in the end, we did okay. You know, we did it, but we saw the opportunity. And I think that's, you know, to go off of what Kevin said, is to see the opportunity in this. Going back to what I spoke to before, are we going to see equality in this next round of distance learning? No. Are we going to see equity? By no means. But we have learned tons as educators. And so I challenge us to try to find the opportunity. As my mind was just, you know, reeling back and forth and going around in circles, I thought, but you know what? For the next kid I have when we're back in person who is going to be sick for a week, I now know how to record my math lesson in 5 minutes and send it in a platform that works for them, that they can watch on their phone. That is something that wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have been forced to do this. Am I rethinking how I use technology in my classroom so that it's more effective at home, just in general? Yes. So taking this as an opportunity to grow, going back, I guess, to that lifelong learner, and really know what is in your curriculum that you didn't know before. What is it that are the tools that you are now forced, best PD ever, right? We had to do it. And kind of think of it as that opportunity. For our caregivers, I get it. I was home with 3 kids, 8 and under, trying to teach full time and school them and all of these pieces. That was impossible. Hopefully this time around, we've put some more time, we've put some more effort in, and things will be more effective. Will it be perfect? By no means. And please know that we get it. Us teachers, please reach out, make that connection, just like Kevin was talking about. We're here to support, we're here to listen, and we really want all of us to be able to work together.
I think that's exactly right. I do see there were a lot of that sinking heart thing happened in March, and then the panic set in, and then that well, maybe I can do this, and maybe I can do a little bit of this. And I love that you're taking these little pieces that I could grab onto and bring them into what is going to be a different way of looking at education moving forward.
And I know as I talk to my colleagues, we were just all so overwhelmed and absolutely exhausted. I mean, to the point where it was just like, we were thinking Zoom, we were thinking Seesaw, we were thinking Edmentum. It was so overwhelming. Yet, when we broke it down, we really had to look at what are the absolute key components. And Victoria spoke about this, how if you can hone in on that one project, you can incorporate all those different pieces, and then it becomes more manageable. and it's more engaging. So finding those pieces and going in and really looking at what are these most critical things? How do I make it effective and accessible to parents, caregivers, and students, and then making sure that we're growing as well. It's exhausting, but I think we've come out on the upside, you know,
down the road, right? Well, and finding what we can do, how we can do it, finding our process, finding our path. Victoria, actually, why don't you answer this question as well? We'll move on to the next one, but basically it's the same question. Victoria, how do you see, what do you wish that everybody knew?
Well, when it comes to virtual learning, what I wish that, what I want parents to see as we go into this next phase is that virtual learning is really all about dynamic, engaging experience for our students. In the spring, as Leslie said, you know, it was an emergency situation. I saw teachers like turn on a dime and like come up with some amazing things. But at the end of the day, those were lessons that were created overnight in a couple days. So just knowing what they did in that short amount of time, if they have months and weeks to plan, it's unfathomable what we can come up with. And so I really want parents to be able to see that. And I think that once we get started, they will see that, that there is actual intentional planning in virtual learning. So I think as we go along, they will see that. And I've spoken about this before in our educator meetings and things like that. But my school actually was in a special situation when this happened, because we actually have built into our schedule non-traditional days. And so those non-traditional days were there for sickness or for bad weather, things like that. And so teachers already had 10 days of lessons ready to go. So that really helped us. And I think that's a shift that we're going to see, is that more districts across the country are going to ask that schools work that into their schedule to have those lessons ready to go on a dime. So I think that's a shift that we're seeing for sure. And then lessons in a virtual setting aren't static, but they help kids learn more on independent ways. So I really hope that parents can see that. This isn't something where we're expecting parents to sit down at a computer and do their lessons with their kids every single day. So I really hope parents will be able to see that in our next little shift. And virtual learning in many ways, and I think this is super important, in many, many ways, it can actually be better suited differentiation and modification than in-classroom learning can be sometimes. A lot of times when we're in a classroom with 30 kids, it's really hard to have that one-on-one time with our kids who need those extra supports. But with virtual learning, just like if I create a Google slide presentation where my students can do their work right there, I can actually put those in groups. So I can do like my above level, I can do my on level, and I can do my below level, 3 different slideshows, and I have it differentiated right there. And my students can complete their work, turn it into me, and it's already put into groups. And then if I know that that person is struggling, then I can do one-on-one Zoom sessions with them, or small group Zoom sessions with that group of students. So I really think that's an important point that a lot of people are super nervous about, and rightfully so. We should always be worried about our populations that are sometimes underserved or are struggling. But I really think that virtual learning has given us an opportunity to really reach those populations if we do it the right way. And a thing that I wish that educators knew about virtual learning is that we're going to have to learn to be a little bit more flexible, especially in our deadlines. We can't expect to have work due every single day and that it's going to get done. For example, I have a student in my classroom who has 5 brothers and sisters, and they have 1 computer in the house. So if all of them have work due every single day, it's not going to get done. And so that's why I think it's important, especially for project-based learning and virtual learning, to have more like units that they can complete over a week or bi-weekly, and that gives them plenty of time. So if they need to do it all in one day, or if they want to do it of small pieces over different parts of the day, that really helps with that. So those are the things that I wish that caregivers and that educators go into this new experience knowing.
And I think it's one of the interesting things that you mentioned here in the course of this is that that typically underserved population, or those special populations needing getting this one-to-one in a virtual world existing. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to see more of that gap created in summer slide, or I don't know, COVID slide, let's call it, and that there's going to be more and more students that are going to need that special small group settings to cover those bases. Yeah, thank you, Victoria. Okay, brilliant. Let's go on, and Kevin, let's talk about all the things that we've talked about today. Can you speak to what you see as being systematic changes? I know, or systemic changes. I know you mentioned it briefly and before, but can you tell me how you see things changing moving forward? What is the big piece? Where are growing opportunities? Where are our gaps? What do we need to do, and how do you see education changing?
So again, I have like 12 things I want to say. It's all blended and mixed up together. I mean, first off, this is a really interesting time. Like as a social studies teacher, I'm trying to really take all this in, because it's not hyperbolic to say that this is legitimately the hardest thing teachers have gone through in probably the history of the US, right? Like when else has school just radically stopped and completely changed on a dime without anyone really expecting it? So it comes down to us. How are we going to react? Is this a time for us to be down and heartbroken and, oh no, things are changing? Or are we going to rise up to the challenge and change things and make it right? Victoria mentioned this a little bit. We need to be flexible and a resource. I mean, because it comes down to what's the point of schools and education. As a teacher, our job is to provide the resources and tools to make our students the best people possible, to make them successful. Something we're seeing at my school is, we have online classes, and it used to be they could come in and do them, but a lot of kids don't have computers. They don't have Wi-Fi. Spanaway is a weird area. It's very metropolitan, but then you go a few blocks and suddenly you're in the woods. So some of them don't even have access to use Wi-Fi, even if they had it. So we've been spending half our time going out delivering laptops. We bought hotspots the other week, and we've been dropping those off at kids' houses. The schools in the area have been really cool. They've been giving out free Wi-Fi from the parking lots so kids can drive in and do that. But it's not just about delivering material anymore or expressing this equation or this history lesson. It's about their lives now. Do you have food? We have a person who goes to a food bank every week and drops off food to our students that need it, because you're not going to learn if you're hungry, right? Like there's real life issues that schools have been providing resources for years, and now all of a sudden that's all gone. So first and foremost, before
or spotlighted, or spotlighted now. Yeah, now everybody realizes that this is what, in addition to teaching, has happened. So.
Yeah, I mean, when you list and think of like the hierarchy of needs, like you got to have those things first, right? And that's our main job right now. And we have to be flexible when you're doing those online activities, and we get to the education. Some kids are going to learn at a slower level. Some aren't going to have the capability. Some might have to share the computer with their siblings. There's a lot of issues here. And so we need to figure out a way to best provide for everyone. And this goes back to what I was saying in the previous one. Individual learning is, I think, the immediate future, because I don't think you can do it with 30 kids and accurately and like realistically help each one. So how do we use synchronous instruction? Well, that's the easy part. That's Zooming, small groups, one-on-one. Really getting through the issue. Asynchronous is going to be trickier. It's going to be a change, but like ed options, full-time ed options teachers already do this. They make lessons and record them so kids can watch those. I think we're going to see a lot more schools adopt programs like Edmentum or other similar programs where there are already classes set up and ready to go. That's the easiest way to do it, and that's how our students do it. So when they don't pass a reconstruction test, that's when we'll come up with a Zoom meeting, and I'll explain to them, well, here's what happened, what didn't you understand, what can we fix, etc. So we're combining asynchronous with synchronous, which I think is the absolute best way to learn. And we were doing this before COVID, but now with COVID, it's highlighting that, as of right now, to me anyway, that's the best way to go about it. So how do you see education changing? I've kind of already talked about this a lot, so I'll skip that one. What must we learn to fly? I think the one area that I haven't hit on yet that I wanted to in my very crazy sheet of notes is Rita Pearson is one of my favorite educators. She's got some TED Talks. She's an educator in Chicago and teaching, I think, 30 plus years. She has a whole section about how kids don't learn well from teachers they don't like. And I feel like when there was traditional school, again, as Leslie was saying too, it's harder to reach everyone when you're one educator in a room with 30 people. and it's hard to form those relationships. But I really think that this is a time of opportunity. Don't think of COVID as the negative so many people are trying to make it out to be. Especially, I see in the media every day so much negativity about what this is going to look like. How is it possible? It's going to be possible because we're educators, and this is what we do. We adapt, and we're good at it, and we've got to be there for our kids. So we gotta find that connection. And like I said, it's going to be easier one-on-one. Hey, I know you really like baseball, but you can't play on the Little League team this year. What position did you want to play? And like just little things like that, little inside joke. I try to come up with a different joke every day for my kids, because if you can get them started on a laugh, you're winning. Like my terrible joke for today is, my new thesaurus is terrible. Also, it's terrible. And I'm sorry for anyone who had to hear that.
I'm sorry that I had to hear that too, kind of.
Everyone's a little bit dumber for hearing that.
Yeah.
But that's how I start off my meetings with kids. And knowing that I'm the teacher will tell them a joke, the one that cares about their lives, their Little League team, their events. I know their family members. Like that's what makes you, that's the difference. And I look back at my own experience. As a teacher, I like school, right? Like I looked forward to it my whole life. And I think back on the classes I didn't do well in, and it wasn't necessarily that it was a tough subject, but I didn't connect with the teacher. And it's not to say they didn't care, because I feel like every teacher on some level has to have some caring in them, but I didn't feel like they were overly expressing it to me. There wasn't a sincerity that I felt. And so it was harder for me to approach them or even want to. But as Ray Pearson says, you've got to be liked, right? And we can do that on such an easier level now that we have Zoom. We can one-on-one and really form those relationships. And of course, it's going to be tough. A lot of kids don't have access to this. And that's where we need to learn and apply is firstly, get them the tools they need to be successful. One thing I was reading the other day is like schools are thinking maybe instead of having an empty building, maybe we could set up some sort of like social distancing daycare. So for the parents who are struggling to, the single mothers who are working and have a young kid, and what do they do now? Maybe we can start using our buildings for other things, daycares or small group learning. Like there's so many things we can do, but we should be looking at this in a positive, optimistic way, because we are forming the future right now, which I don't think has been able to be said in education in what, decades, centuries.
Sure.
And I'm not exaggerating. Like this is a turning point, and we are forming it.
I think that you bring up a really good point, and I think that when we closed down, we already had, for those of us who are in the brick and mortar world, we already had those relationships existing, and they were already there. So translating that into a virtual environment was easier for those of us who are used to doing it in a face-to-face world. And I'm going to toss this out to Victoria and Leslie, and I didn't prep you for this at all, but how do you think that this is going to work? Can you give some examples of what you're going to do in that virtual world to build those connections, to build that build that community as well? That if it's virtual or if it's half and half or hybrid or some version of it. Leslie, why don't I start with you?
Sure. And I want to go back to a little bit about what Kevin was talking as well about that connection. And when he kind of, what you said as well is, before the shutdown happened, we had those connections with students because we had been teaching them for up until March, and then schools closed so abruptly. And so now going into the next section, whatever's going to happen in the fall, how do I connect with my families that don't speak my same language? How do I connect with families that don't have a phone? I had a specific student this year where they, their phone just wouldn't work. And then I would have a week without any contact with them. What do you do when those normal connection lines kind of go down? And so one thing that depends on your population, of course, is I will be sending my postcards. I send them every year. And as silly as it sounds, it's a simple postcard to every kid. You want to check addresses because every year a couple come back to me. And with transient populations, that gets even harder, especially with kiddos in shelters and such forth. But making that initial connection, and if you can even put a picture of yourself on that postcard, that can, just up that connection even more. I'm going to do phone calls right away, just to make sure that I can make that connection with caregivers, families, parents, kids, and making sure that I'm asking, what are your basic needs? What do you need? Have you been getting, here in the Twin Cities and surrounding areas in Minnesota, the kiddos have any child, doesn't even have to go to that school district, can have free meals, and they have food boxes that can go home, and they have pickup places all over. But even with that, what are those basic needs that need to be met? Going back to Wi-Fi, all of those different pieces. I was looking at some of the chat questions. Half of my students don't even have a device. One solution we had was to put all of our pre-recorded materials into a Google folder that was open. And so kids could watch that on a phone, at least, and not necessarily need an actual computer, iPad, or tablet. And so kind of getting around those pieces to make those connections. But going back to what Kevin said, it's all about those connections and how do you engage with those families and kids.
I actually heard of a rural district that used their public television station to throw up videos of the teachers talking. So it's 3 o'clock, it's Miss O'Leary's turn, and she would give her, my little video would go up, but it was on PBS. So I thought that was kind of a fabulous thing. Victoria, do you have something you might want to add to that?
Well, just to talk about how I'm going to plan to connect with my students this year, kind of like the same thing as Leslie. I always send out a letter at the beginning of the year. This year's a little bit different. On the postcards, I'm actually adding a QR code to a video of me introducing myself and my favorite things and things like that.
That's
and
brilliant.
I'm also including a QR code to Flipgrid to where they can give a response. So they can record their video, that way I can watch theirs too. And then for my students who don't have that great of access, I do give them like a little return address to where they can send me something back if they want to. But that's just one way to build those relationships before the school year even starts. And another thing that I'm finding to be pretty popular right now with my new class coming in is I've opened up conference times for my parents. And so they've been setting up Zoom sessions with me, that way that we can talk about what they're really worried about for the school year and what they really feel like they don't really have to worry about that much. So I've already had a couple of those sessions with my parents, and they've turned out really, really good. And we've had some great conversations. So those are just 2 ways that I've been trying to build connections.
I think that's great. And it's Flipgrid, right? The Flipgrid is where the response is coming through?
Yes, Flipgrid. And my students, I teach them to use that in the classroom, and they love it. They can add little emojis. They can do the editing on the videos, and then we can remix those, and I can send them a video back. Oh, they just love it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful. All right, I want to thank our guests for sharing their views and where education is growing and changing, and the systemic changes we are getting to look forward to. Carrie, do you have some questions from the group chat that we might want to address, or Haley, today, or themes that we've missed that our esteemed guests might be able to share?
Yeah, I'll jump in. And just so everybody knows, we will start the audience Q&A now. So if you have a question, please go ahead and add it into that Q&A. We've had quite a few questions around engagement in online learning, and I know we've talked quite a bit about building connections, but what are you guys doing before the school year starts to make sure that those kids are engaged?
And I think that's a really great question, because I think that speaks to everything we've been talking about. How do you start that community? And Victoria with your postcards, and Leslie with postcards and letters. And I love this idea of the QRC. I think that's fantastic. Kevin, do you have something that you want to jump in there, and then we'll go to Victoria and Leslie with that? How do you start?
Yeah, so what we do, since we're open enrollment, we have a couple new kids every week. What we do is 2 of our staff members put on a full orientation. It's like an hour long. We've got a video introduction. They explain all the different parts of how our program works. They show them the classes. They get them their login all info. And then once they get, after orientation's over and they're ready to go, one of the teachers, usually me, will call them and introduce myself and then walk them through their real course. Now they're actually in one. So that way they're fully prepared. They can ask any questions they have. And then we always, really let them know, please contact us if you need help. We have the texting hotline open at all times. I'm at home not doing anything. If you email me, I'll probably respond. And just lay that all out there and really let them know that we have their back, which I feel is very important.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Somebody just chatted in about that setting the stage for the first day is so critical for the rest of the year. And I think that, I actually think that I don't know that it is anymore. Like I'm interested to hear, Victoria and Leslie, what your response to that, because I think that things are changing so fast that we don't even know what the first day of the school year is going to be right now, like in some states and some districts. So I think that take some of that pressure off of yourself as an educator to know we're going to still be trying to figure this out. There's some things that you should know, like how to get in touch with your IT person, who is your counselor, and how does the student get in touch with them? Some of those other things. Leslie, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, so one thing that I was, the first couple weeks I had high engagement, and then it just slowly dropped off, and I realized that I wasn't changing things up enough. So what I had kind of always had success with in the classroom was my routines, making sure that children knew what was coming, what was expected, so that it wasn't so much me centered and having to guide my classroom. They knew the routine, they knew the expectations. But what I found online was that when I kept everything consistent, they were getting super bored. So I had to spice it up a bit. And I went back to simply going to a lot of different games and teaching them a game that had a learning component to it, and then having that game available for them to continue independently. And for the older kiddos, you're in elementary, you're 4, 5, having that go into a game where they had to search and read for the answers. And so things like that was different. And simple games, even in my 3rd grade classroom, we played Simon Says. It got them all up and moving and engaged and giggling and laughing. And then, we did that for 3 minutes, and then it was bam, we're into our lesson. They came back for the games. They came back for the silly jokes. Kevin said that he does jokes every day. So do I. He came back, and I hooked them with that stuff. And not to say that I didn't run out of ideas. My goodness. But, you have to reinvent. And so that was one piece for engagement, where I found that I couldn't necessarily go back on routines because it had to be changed up so much.
Yeah, and I think that there's something to be said for that. There is a routine that's in place, but what you do in those routines, like you could say, I would play a game.
Structure.
Yeah.
But the routine part of it wasn't working.
I have to agree. Yeah, I can see that. Absolutely. I can see that with my own family members. So, Victoria, do you have something you want to add with that too?
Just going off what Leslie said, the thing that brought my students in a lot was the game component. And just for a resource that people can use, one of my favorites that my kids love is actually GimKit. And you can bring in questions from your own curriculum, things like that. But it actually is like a small competition to where they get money for every question that they get right, and then they can use that for power-ups. You can use sabotages if you want. I leave sabotages on. They enjoy it. But if you have somebody who's been a little extra salty that day, you can turn it back off. But GimKit is a good one. And so yeah, the game part is super, super important. I also think it's really important when we're going into this is last year when we went off in the spring, my students knew how to use every tool that I wanted them to use. Now that I'm getting a new group of students, they're not going to know those tools. So like my first 2 weeks of lessons that I've got planned out are just how to use those tools and how I want them to use them to be successful. So they're like fun activities, but they're learning how to use the tools I want them to use to complete their work. So like I'll be using Google Slides a lot. So in order to get them to know how to use all that, they're creating like an all about me slideshow about themselves. So they learn how to input a picture with, there's a video of me telling them how to do it. They learn how to change the font. They learn how to, change the text box, things like that. So I think that's a really important component that we're gonna have to think about, is how we can get them to be able to use that. And even my students who are not online, they don't have internet service or anything like that. The Google Slides are special because you can make them to where they're offline editable. So you can save that right to their laptop. And then at the end of the week, they can either come out and upload that and share it with you. That way you can see it and then get the new one. Or if they turn their work in each week, they can print it off and bring it to you. So I think that's an important part as well.
The next thing I would add to piggyback on Victoria is not only to have the tutorials or have that created, I do the exact same thing. So creating the activity where they're learning how to use the tech tool, but also to have an explanation for parents to refer back to. So, I constantly got asked, what's the login for this? And I was like, they only need one login. One. You've given them their login 30 times. So just that basic video of, from sharing the screen of what a student looks like, how do you go in, if there's any parent reports that they can see, anything that they can do it. And then also making sure, if possible, that there are instructions in the languages that the parents may need it.
I think that's I love that, and I'm glad that you and Victoria brought that piece in, because I think a lot of pressure has been put on parents to know how to do things that they haven't needed to know, and we can't do that independent of instruction as well. That has to come with its own instruction. So perfect. All right, Haley, do we have another question? Haley, you're on mute too. So
thank you. Sorry, it was I was struggling with getting off mute. Yeah, so I like the parent segue because we've had quite a few questions around a connection with parents and setting boundaries and expectations. And we've had quite a few people who are just wondering, what are you doing as educators to help those parents out?
So that you faded out a little bit there, Haley, so I'm going to restate this. So one of the questions that we've had a number of questions come through about parents, and one of the questions is, how do you support parents? How do you teach parents? How do you make the resources available for parents, et cetera, et cetera? Kevin, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So my student age range is 16 to 21, so I actually don't deal with a lot of parents. Many of them are adult. But
that's fair to say.
Yeah. So, but there are many that do want to know stuff. So what I've set up is a direct personal line with them. Like, they have my personal number, and I tell them, do not be afraid to contact me. I have a few parents who weekly, I update them on their child and give them a progress report, because since everything is at their own pace and their own motivation, sometimes you'll see very little progress. And then that leads to a conversation, maybe between the parent and the student, or me, the parent and the student. But I just try to be as open as possible and make it as easy to contact me as it can be.
And some teachers are not comfortable with sharing their own personal phone number. And you can use Google Voice for that, which will then give you a phone number, and that it goes to your phone, but it's not your phone. So
yeah, Ring Central is another good one.
Okay, I'm sorry, say that again.
Ring Central is another one like that. That's pretty good.
Perfect. Victoria, do you have something that you want to add to this about working with parents?
Yeah, actually, I have, like Kevin said, about making a consistent way of communication. I'm sure a lot of teachers in here have been joining in on the little Bitmoji craze that's going on, especially in the Facebook world. So I've been doing that as well, and I've created a little classroom hub. And in my classroom hub, there's actually a tutorial spot. So my parents all have this on their phone, and then it has a list of all the tutorials for all the tools that we'll be using. So they're split up by Google Classroom, Google Slides, and then how to use my app. And so my parents have been finding that really helpful, and they've actually watched a few. So they're getting a little more confident, and they started signing their kids up for the Google Classroom. So far that's been a good help. Just having a centralized place that they know they can go and find what they're looking for has been a huge help.
Well, that centralized place, I know that we've talked about this before in the past, is if you send, communication as being that critical piece, but if you send 27 emails in one afternoon, it's like sending 0 emails because the parents just can't keep up with it. So yeah. And you said it was what's the name of it? Classroom Hub?
Well, I actually created that on Google Slides, and then
Okay.
so there's just a slideshow presentation, and then it's just hyperlinked to all the different things that I want it to be. So like my contact button, when you hit that, they can either call my Google Voice number, they can send me an email, or they can fill out a Google form that has their question that I can get back to them later, or they can message me on Facebook. So it's just hyperlinks.
It's just hyperlinks. That's brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Leslie, what about you?
I have found that honestly, just being open to listening to parents has been huge. You know, we had to talk a lot of parents off cliffs as they struggled to figure out how to get work done and go to their essential job, and feeling like that parent guilt of failing their child, failing their families, not being able to be present. When we went back and looked at the analytical data from when kids went online, there were elementary students who were on at 11 at night. There were people who were logging on at 5:30 in the morning. And so looking at that big spectrum of need of when parents might be home and that support that they might be able to have to give their child. One suggestion is to including in your training of your students to use the tech tools is to also talk about independence and start to instill some of those work habits and independent habits that the students can then self-monitor themselves and have those self-assessments to ask the students, you know, are you following your schedule, or what successes have you had today? What do you need to fix tomorrow? And then also educating parents on how they can instill that sense of independence in their kids, and that self-efficacy, self-reflecting, and all of those pieces. Because ultimately, if we can get the kids to be more independent, that takes less pressure off parents. And sometimes parents don't necessarily have those skills. Even me as a parent, sometimes I'm really lacking the ability to parent my own children. So sometimes just those gentle reminders of skills that we need them to have as people, and how they can build that in this kind of at-home learning environment will be effective, not only for the parents, but for the kiddos ultimately as well.
And I think that's a brilliant, that's something that translates into the brick and mortar classroom very easily. Those soft skills is important, as you said, to make people.
Winnie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about creativity too, giving them as many different avenues. This is sort of similar to Victoria. I'm not going to log in, but we actually have an app that we created that they can build their own schedules, and then we can see it, so we know when they're supposed to be working. We also have like incentives and competitions and all that kind of stuff, and it's all tracked in the app. Plus, they can see like how many credits they have towards graduating, or which classes they still need, or what they've done. So it gives them a whole overview without necessarily needing to come to us. They have all the access on their phone.
Perfect. So again, you're teaching that autonomy, and the same thing that Leslie and Victoria are talking about with third and elementary school students, you're talking about with the high school. And I think that it just goes to show that this is a skill that needs to be taught and reinforced.
I always try to bring it back to relevancy. Like, why are you doing this? What's the point of this class? Why haven't you logged in the week? What's your goal? Always try to make it back to them. Like, how does this affect you directly in your future?
Sure. All right, Haley, I think I have time is almost up. We don't have time for another question, do we?
No, we are coming up on time. We have got about less than a minute left, and I want to make sure that we stay on schedule today. So we will wrap up the presentation. But before we go, I'm going to run through those quick last minute reminders.
Well, before you do that, Haley, I want to thank Leslie and Victoria and Kevin, and I really appreciate them taking their time from their summer or prepping for classroom. And in Kevin's case, I want to thank his wife for not having her baby today, and waiting. And so we're just going to hope for Sunday, because that's where my money is. So now I can turn it back to you, Haley.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Winnie. All right, everyone. So I did just put that link in the chat to get back to the conference event session, so you can find your next breakout session. Just so you all know, this panel was recorded, and you'll receive the links in the email next week. And then I hope that you all enjoy your next session. Thank you so much to Winnie and our panelists. That was really great.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the session.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.